the very immediate question of how the Trump administration is doing with the challenge that you just described. And I'd ask each of you, starting with Lisa, to evaluate what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. What concerns you in the way that they're dealing with this question? We'll get to the larger question of Russia and Russia's activity. I mean, really just in terms of organizing for the basic cyber threat.
So I'll start positive, which is to say, I think in large measure, this is a story of continuity, building on work from multiple administrations. I think the Trump administration has actually, if you look at it, continued a lot of what was going on in the last administration. Here I would point to things like basically an approach that says we are going to determine who done it, who is the malicious cyber actor, call them out, and impose costs. That's something that you saw the Obama administration do, beginning with the 5 members of the People's Liberation Army in China, where we indicted those individuals for stealing intellectual property. That's a case I began when I was Assistant Attorney General at the Justice Department. And then you can track it all the way through to Sony, to Iran, to Russia. I think the Trump administration has basically kept that philosophy, but accelerated it, and rightly so. I believe we should be calling out and imposing costs against these malicious cyber actors. They've kept in place things like the sanctions regime that the Obama administration started to impose sanctions, giving the authority to impose sanctions against malicious cyber actors. But where I would say they have gone, I think, very dramatically and dangerously astray, that is in the accountability and responsibility in the White House and in the government writ large for cyber security issues. They have gotten rid of, inexplicably, the role of the cyber coordinator. Rob Joyce, who held that job in the Trump administration till about 6 or 7 months ago, I think, is a tremendously talented career professional from NSA, held that role, by all accounts did a very good job, and it makes no sense, and I think actually is governmental and management malpractice not to have somebody who is focused in the White House 24/7, 100% of his or her time on the cybersecurity threat, which we and the intelligence community have said for 5 years running is the greatest threat we face, and in fact, above and beyond
Lisa,
terror.
just explain, because few people have had the experience you have had. What difference does it make if you don't have a Rob Joyce coordinating cyber? What's missing? What stops happening? So,
and we'll get to this later in the discussion, I think, there's a myriad responsibilities and roles across the federal government for cybersecurity. In the Department of Homeland Security for protecting critical infrastructure, in the FBI for investigating particularly state actor cyber threats, the Secret Service, obviously NSA and Cyber Command for our offensive cyber operations. So you have a whole range of roles and responsibilities around the federal government. It will surprise no one to know that isn't always without friction. You need one place in the federal government, and that happens in the National Security Council and the White House, to bring all those people around the table to move out on a strategy and on a policy. That policy is set rightly from the White House, from the president, and then implemented and coordinated out of the White House and out of the National Security Council. You would never imagine that you wouldn't have a national security advisor to make sure everyone is rowing in the same direction on Iraq policy, on China policy, on Syria policy, you name it. The same is true on cybersecurity, and it is such a great threat and such a great challenge that not having somebody focused 100% of his or her time, I think, is a tremendous gap and irresponsible. And I would say the structure in the White House that has now for more than 10 or 12 years been the structure for Homeland Security and counterterrorism and cybersecurity, at least domestically. That structure has been the Homeland Security Advisor role, the role I had, the role that Tom Bossert had, John Brennan, Fran Townsend, Ken Weinstein, going back to the Bush administration. That role was responsible for cybersecurity. They had a cyber coordinator who reported to the Homeland Security Advisor and the National Security Advisor. Getting rid of that structure, I think, is a real mistake.
Dave,